Hello, welcome to Jason the Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you in my basement in the great state of Kansas, and I'm just going to go right into my part 3 of my Beatles deep dive, which I've started a little while ago, because after I did my top 10 favorite Beatles songs, I thought I usually do a deep dive along with my top 10, so started with a Beatle dive, and I'm doing it off the top of my head with no notes, just what I know from being a longtime fan. And it's definitely taken me longer to go through because I know so much information. There's so much to talk about. I love talking about the Beatles anyway. So I know last time I was doing part 2, I believe I ended in 1966 of the Beatles. So we're getting to 1967, and it's another, of course, huge year for the Beatles. At this point, of course, the Beatles, we hadn't really seen the Beatles that much at this point, 1967. 1966, like I said, they stopped touring. And then they made Revolver at that time too, right before they stopped touring. And then, yeah, they kind of were out, we didn't see them as much. And except for the last video I think we probably saw was they put out a video of Paperback Writer and Rain, which was their big single at the time, 1966. That went #1 anyway. So when you get to 1967, we're like wondering what's going on with the Beatles. They're spending a lot of time. They used to do 2 albums a year. We're now getting to the Beatles where we're just doing 1 album a year, basically, for the most part. So I think we're still doing some multiple albums. 1967, we're doing just 1 album. That's probably the biggest one of the biggest albums I've ever did, and that was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. You probably heard this album. It's on any list of top albums of all time, and considered one of their greatest. But yeah, they're definitely spending a lot more time in the studio writing their songs and mixing them or whatever and doing whatever they do. And this album was interesting because it kind of started with an idea for a concept album that Paul kind of came up with this idea of instead of having the Beatles tour, since they weren't touring anymore, or instead of being the Beatles, let's make up a whole different band persona. And so he came up with this band name, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, is like this different band. Of course, if you see the cover and you've seen them in some videos, they have these kind of wild, colorful outfits with, I think George had a hat, but they have these almost military style kind of colorful outfits, really cool outfits that you'll see a lot in Beatle tribute bands, stuff like that anyway. So Paul comes with this idea. So it's not really a concept album. It kind of starts that way with Sgt. Pepper's. It goes right into a little help from my friends, as they call Ringo Billy Shears, as if he's like not Ringo, but a different drummer for this band that they made up. And then they have a reprise later on, but that's the only parts that are concept. Besides that, it's just another kind of more psychedelic style album, you would say. Considered one of the great psychedelic albums of all time, because definitely Beatles definitely going that way. At this time, the psychedelic music is coming pretty big in 1967. Of course, they're taking LSD, as a lot of people were taking at this time that are in the music business. It's full-on hippies now, and Summer of Love and all that. So yeah, they come up with the Sgt. Pepper's, put it out. Of course, it's huge. It's one of the big selling albums for them. It's #1, of course. Before they put Sgt. Pepper's, actually, they put 2 singles out, a double A side, which is probably the biggest double A side they've ever put out, which was Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. One was a John song, one's a Paul song, both kind of about a place they live in Liverpool area. One's about field next to orphanage, next is an actual street in, I think, Liverpool, Penny Lane. Anyway, so they're kind of talking about almost like this reminiscing of childhood. Anyway, interesting, they both put out their songs, and both were huge, though they didn't go #1, I don't think, and went like #3 or something like that, which is crazy. It's both in my top 15 favorite Beatles songs of all time. And that was an interesting video they put out for Strawberry Fields, especially. It's this really psychedelic video. The Beatles look much different than they ever did. They did away with the hairstyle, the shaggy hairstyle, and the clean-shaven look. Some of them are now, a lot of them are having beards now. John's starting to have those wearing glasses that they call granny glasses. He's starting to make that kind of a popular thing. And he has kind of an interesting like mustache kind of thing going. Looks way different than he did back in the earlier days, I would say. And they do this video, and it's very colorful. They're around a piano, and they're in a tree, and they're singing the song, and they're going backwards. And that was like, I heard people say that's like kind of the introduction to music videos, MTV, or probably came about with that idea of like, hey, how about we put bands in music videos and do something interesting, not just have them just stand there. Usually videos are just them standing there singing to the camera, but with Strawberry Fields, it was like, oh wow, they're doing something kind of interesting with the whole. They're not just singing in front of the camera, but doing interesting camera tricks like that. It definitely works for that era. Anyway, so yeah, Sgt. Pepper. Yeah, it also is the only album from the Beatles that won the Grammy for Album of the Year. So I mean, it was definitely changing music to where I think everybody had to kind of pay attention to rock music as being the mainstream. It felt like Grammys at the time, especially, which is like, I don't know if they're like the older people that are, like didn't want to, change with the times of the rock and roll, and they're still hanging on to the past. I mean, Frank Sinatra, Barbra Streisand, Judy Garland, they were winning Grammys for Album of the Years, and it wasn't the current rock music. So they're still hanging on to like the 50s, 40s sound, anyways, at this point. And it felt like in 1967, they were finally going, okay, we're changing with the times with Sgt. Pepper's, and we're going to recognize rock music is kind of the mainstream of culture anyway. So I think that was a big deal at that time. A big deal that album kind of won. And after that, rock albums would start to win, and pop albums would be winning Grammy Album of the Years after that. Current, kind of music and all that. So also, Sgt. Pepper's is the first album that's the first. It's the same in the U.S. and the U.K. Up to that point, the U.S. was putting out different albums, like I said, introducing the Beatles, Meet the Beatles, Beatles' second album, I think, Beatles 65, Today and Yesterday or something, Yesterday and Today, I think it was called, Something New. Like, those were the name of like the U.S. albums, and we mostly know the UK albums are the ones that we all kind of more pay attention to nowadays. But at the time, US was getting different albums. And even, Help was different. Hard Day's Night was different. US wasn't getting that second side. They were getting all instrumental from the movie. And then even you go to Rubber Soul, Rubber Soul came out both places around the same time, but the US Rubber Soul took out some songs and added other ones. Same thing with Revolver. The US version of Revolver is different. Anyways, just say Sgt. Pepper was, kind of monumental in that it was the exact same album, both the UK and the US. So we finally kind of started making a change there where we're getting the same thing and everything's, the same. Anyways, but yeah, Sgt. Pepper's, what can you say? It's one of the greatest albums of all time. Definitely, they already were the greatest band of all time, but it was definitely furthering their legacy, and especially as a psychedelic band from being just a rock pop band anyways. But yeah, so you got 1967, and then you get to 1968. I can't remember all the details of what happens, to be honest. I get a little murky in the late 60s exactly what happens. A couple things that happen. George, of course, really is getting into the Hindu religion and India and all that. Yeah, it started with the movie Help. There was an Indian store or something like that, and he went in and he saw what do you call it? I forget now. Their guitar that they have, and started plucking away with that, and somehow he got into Hindu and all this. And the sitar, sorry. He started getting into the sitar. And then, of course, you hear the sitar on Rubber Soul and Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's. You hear all this sitar music. And so he's really getting full into all that. And he discovers a meditation guru, a guy, the Maharishi, I think his name was, like transcendental meditation. And he was in Wales or something like that, I think, or somewhere, and they went and saw him, and he got all the other three Beatles to go with him, so they all kind of went together as a group and saw it, I guess, and kind of were into it. This Eastern religious, kind of, at the time, like I said, hippie movement, there's a drug movement. Eastern religion was getting big in the United States as well, and UK. It was all kind of just tied in together. Like there's this huge big movement coming in with the young people at that time. Anyway, so later there, of course, the Maharishi's from India. He has like a whole thing in India. He does these, I don't know what you call them, has people there, and he gives speeches on transcendental meditation and how to do it. And, meditation is all about, as far as I know, is like about, sitting there and quiet and doing your mantra and, and having this like religious experience by yourself, just being quiet and, and clearing your mind and not thinking of anything anyways, and all this. And somehow peace comes about or whatever. Anyway, so they do have a time where they go to India and spend some time there learning about transcendental meditation. It was a big deal. It was all over the press, and Maharishi was definitely loves celebrities, coming to him and getting all that, attention. And so he loved that the Beatles were coming. So he made a really special big deal about the Beatles coming and all that. Other people were there, like I know Mike Love from the Beach Boys was there. Mia Farrow and her sister Prudence Farrow was there. And Donovan was there. I know there's some other famous musicians and actors and all this were all coming, and it was kind of a big thing at the moment. Anyway, so they go to India to do that. It was mostly a George thing, and John was maybe somewhat into it, but I don't think Paul and Ringo were necessarily that into it. And so, yeah, they do that. A big event that happens while they're there is their manager, Brian Epstein, commits suicide. I can't remember how old he was, but he wasn't very old when it happened. I think he was in his 30s when it happened, maybe early 30s. Why he committed suicide, we can only guess. I don't know if they said exactly. Of course, he was a closeted homosexual and had to keep that kind of a hidden thing. And obviously had, some personal demons that he had trouble with. I think alcoholism, drugs. And at the time, he was kind of a big deal because he was with the Beatles and he was in charge of, managing them. But then once the Beatles stopped touring, Brian Epstein kind of didn't have as big of a role in the group and what they did. And I think he felt like he was losing power in the group and his importance and what does he have to do with anything and all that, and a lot of depression probably and negative thoughts and all that. And unfortunately, took his life. And of course, big hit to the Beatles still, even at that time. I mean, it happened while they were in India and they were pretty devastated, because now what they do, they need another manager who's going to control all that part of their, their lives that they don't control. Anyway, so that was a big event, of course. Also on India, of course, I think they were kind of bored. There wasn't a lot to do, just meditating. It kind of gets boring after a while. So they had their guitars with them and they would write songs while they're there. And so a lot of songs were written while they're in India. And so when they came back to the States, they had a whole lot of songs to put together anyways. And they end up kind of putting them all together into an album that we call the White Album, which is really the Beatles' self-titled album. But it's the cover's all white, so we call it the White Album. It's a lot easier calling it that way. Anyways, and so it's a double album, 30 songs. Everybody puts in a bunch of stuff in there. Ringo gets his very first song that he wrote. He only wrote 2 songs with the Beatles, and he finally got his first one with the White Album, because it was a double album. They just threw everything out there, and it's such a crazy album. It's an amazing album because they get all kinds of crazy, I say crazy, kind of different things. You get, your hard rock, you get your more ballad types of songs. You have even like a lullaby song in there. You have a kind of more reggae style song in there, Beach Boys style, psychedelic style, Helter Skelter, first like heavy metal song probably ever written. Definitely the hardest song they've ever written together. But yeah, all these different styles. You get country folk in there, a sing-along child song. I mean, heavy rock. I mean, everything. They did like every single style in there and somehow put together, and it works. Even though I think it could have been a shorter album. They do probably the worst song, in my opinion, Revolution 9, which is a very avant-garde, experimental idea where it's not really a song. It's just them talking and weird noises mixed in, and it's like a 9-minute song. It's like the longest song they've ever did, and it's a terrible song if you want to call it that. I said it's not really a song. They don't sing. It's just a lot of noises put together and looped in, and just, I don't know, all kinds of stuff just mixed in. Anyway, so it definitely, we're going way out there with this album. Anyway, still was a hit album, #1 and all that. And I produced some of the best songs on there, like While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Blackbird, just absolutely amazing stuff. Dear Prudence, after Prudence Marrow, that was with their, Prudence Farrow, who was, wouldn't come out. And so they wrote this whole song anyway. So yeah, interesting time period. And they definitely, you can tell the Beatles were becoming not as connected as a group anymore and becoming more individual, as the songs felt like more like solo songs and not a complete band. You know, you didn't quite have, I mean, you didn't feel like you had quite that great harmonies like you did on other albums. And like I said, yeah, they're all just kind of going to the studio and writing. They wrote the song themselves, basically. You know, Lynn McCartney songs are still Lynn McCartney, but it's really just John or Paul's writing most of the songs on whatever they're singing. But it was them playing and recording and kind of in control of each song that they did in the studio. And they were going in, you know, at different times to do their songs. And yeah, so it just felt like it wasn't, it's still a great album, still had some good stuff, but yeah, somehow it was, you can see they were starting to, what's the word, you know, drift apart as a band at the same time anyways. Also, we had some stuff like Yellow Submarine, I think, came out around this time, and they made a cartoon called Yellow Submarine, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the Beatles. There's Beatle characters, but the Beatles don't voice any of their own characters in the movie. They get British actors to impersonate the Beatles. The Beatles do show up at the very end of the movie for like a split second. But you have some Beatles songs, but really there's only like 4 new Beatles songs on the album, so it's barely a Beatles album, but it's considered part of the Beatles canon, I guess. So it is a Beatles album, though it's considered by most to be the worst. And I think it's a really terrible movie. It's a really weird psychedelic cartoon, but I know there's some fans out there for it. But anyways, but yeah, so we get that around this time as well. So yeah, a lot of big stuff happening in 67, 68. And I probably will just close it there and do a part 4 to do 69, 70. And that'll close out as the Beatles break up in 1970. So yeah, I might just do one more part just to close out the series on the Beatles deep dive. And the Beatles are so good, they can't do just one part. We need 4 parts to do the whole deep dive. So yeah, so thanks you for watching this. Hopefully you learned something if you didn't know this information already. I love to read your comments. I know Ryan, you've been putting out really good comments out there. I really enjoy that you're watching and learning stuff about my favorite band. And Mike, I know you don't like the Beatles, but I'm hoping you're watching and learning something still anyways. And everybody else that appreciates Beatles, I hope I'm doing justice to the Beatles in itself. But yeah, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for liking it. And thank you to all my subscribers for supporting the channel. I appreciate you all, and I hope you have a good day.